Thanks, Fortini. I had to unmute myself. So you are correct, it's Straka, but I'm not too fussed about it. So thanks very much for the invitation. So thanks very much for joining. I have a little bit of a cold, so I hope my voice lasts through until the end. Start to share my screen now. Okay, can you see it? Perfect. Okay, so I prepared a little presentation. I'm also going to talk about the 3 questions that Ella already responded as well a little bit later, but I just wanted to set a little bit the scene where I'm doing my research and where we are, and just maybe to bring us all in the mindset of urban environment and why we need to study wildlife in urban areas. And so the focus of my research is, as Fortini said before, so I'm at the moment a postdoc at the TU in Berlin, and my major research areas are urban ecology, bats, and human dimensions. And maybe also shortly about me and my background, as Fortini said as well. So I did my studies in zoology in Munich. So I'm German. I'm originally from the south of Germany. And I work already since 2007 with bats, so actually really quite a long time. So, and it's very often when you start working with bats or one certain wildlife and you get very fascinated about it, that you just get stuck with them. And that happened to me as well with bats. And I went from 2011 to 2015 to Australia and to do my PhD in urban ecology, where I was also looking at bats in the urban environment. And the nice thing is with working with bats is that, so there are 1,400 species of bats all around the world. They are actually everywhere around the world except in the Arctic and Antarctic regions. So if you love to travel and love to do fieldwork or research, bats are really a very interesting species because you can work basically everywhere with them. So I always took advantage when I traveled or tried to build collaborations with different researchers from different parts of the world, also in India, which was very fascinating, like very different kind of field research. Like we were always putting jasmine flowers, for example, in our hair when we were going to the field. So very, very different compared to other areas. So what is my research about? So I thought I'd make it very broad, just to say, well, I'm very interested to understand how to create biodiversity-friendly cities. So we all know that cities are growing worldwide. They transform natural areas. They grow especially in biodiversity hotspots area. And sometimes urbanization can go really fast. And as you can see also in the photo, urbanization most often means also like more built structures, more houses, more roads, different anthropogenic impact like light, noise, pollution, like humans as well. Like, I mean, there is a lot going on in urban areas, but there are still a lot of animals, like a lot of wildlife that can live in urban areas. And one of the taxon that can live in urban areas are bats. And so in Berlin, we have actually 18 different bat species, which is quite a lot. So so I'm interested to look at these species, how can they live and thrive in an urban environment? And most of I'll start with the very first question, of course. When I think about if we want to create bat-friendly cities, what do bats actually need? So of course they need dark areas, so they are nocturnal animals. And so bats are not blind, but some bats, so they use echolocation, as you might know, to navigate through the night. And there are some bat species that are very sensitive to light. So not all bat species, but some bat species are very sensitive to light. Then they need foraging and drinking areas. So our bats in Germany or in Europe eat on insects, so they need insect-rich areas. And of course, they need also roosts where they can sleep during the day, which are mostly tree hollows or buildings also. So, and this is where most of my research is based around. So I was looking, for example, as well, what kind of street lamps are beneficial for bats? So what kind of street lamps are less detrimental to bats, for example? And here we did a study in Berlin where we were looking at different street lamp types, and we found, for example, that mercury vapor lamps are very bad for bats, and LED street lamps are much better for bats. So we could detect this by bat activity and species, like what kind of species occurred in these areas. I'm also very interested what kind of landscapes or habitats in urban areas are very important for bats. So this was part for my PhD, where I was looking at different wetlands in the urban environment. So this was back in Melbourne, and I was looking what kind of vegetation structures do bats need at wetlands? Like, do they need kind of shrubs and a lot of reed, because then there are a lot of insects, so they can eat these insects? Or do they also need trees around these wetlands for orientation or wind shelter, also for roosts? So here was here I was looking at what kind of wetlands they would need. And I get more and more interested also, like, what do people actually think about bats as well? So we as bat ecologists, so I'm of course, like, as far as for me, I would always think like we should protect bats and create bat-friendly cities. But what do people actually think about bats in the urban environment, especially when they roost in their houses? Also, as I was looking in my PhD, so on the one hand, I knew what kind of wetlands are important for bats, but I had kind of one time, I met one time an Australian at a wetland, and we chatted, and he asked me, so why do you care about bats? Or who cares about bats actually, and why do you want to create bat-friendly wetlands? And so this was kind of a turning point for me when I realized, okay, when we are in an urban environment and we want to create landscapes that benefit biodiversity, we also have to keep people in mind. What do they actually appreciate? What are their aesthetics of landscapes? And what do they actually think about the wildlife to make this really, really sustainable? Because theory also says that people's preferences, what they find aesthetically pleasing as in landscapes, that drives landscapes over time, because it can also put pressure on management and also motivates different behavior in landscapes that they don't like. So and now I'm coming actually to the questions that you asked me. So what guides my research? So as probably most of you, I also deeply care about nature and wildlife, such as bats. So that's my major driver. And so I really want to understand how bats and other nocturnal wildlife can thrive in the city and also coexist with humans. But at the same time, of course, also aware that people might think different than I do. Like everybody, not everybody might care about bats as much as I do. So I also have to think, what do people actually think about bats, and also about the landscapes that benefit bats? And so at the moment, I'm really curious about how can I actually reach people in relation to nature and wildlife protection. So I was getting really interested also in my PhD, how can we communicate with the public to make it also relevant to them? So if I tell people, well, we have to protect bats because they're under threat and they provide really important ecosystem services, maybe some people might care about this, but not everybody. So I also have to think, what do people actually care about? What are their values? What do they really care about when I communicate? So that's something I'm really interested in. And then, of course, like, how can we create cities in which people and wildlife can thrive side by side? Something around a shared habitat, something around when we create landscapes that encourage biodiversity. How do people actually perceive these landscapes? Do they appreciate them? Do they have, also as Ella said before, like, do they have really amazing, really good nature experiences? So that would be something I'm quite interested as well, and of course about aesthetics. And something I'm asking myself a lot recently, it's a bit more an ethical question. I also ask myself a lot, what kind of wildlife do we actually want in cities, and who actually makes the decisions, like, and based on what do we make the decision to decide what wildlife species we want in the urban environment? So that's a bit of an ethical question I was thinking a lot, especially also in relation to native and non-native wildlife. And so I also think always, like, who makes the decision, like if a raccoon can live in the city or not, actually. So that's something I'm pondering a lot on recently. And my big learning curves recently were also that, so I was getting interested, of course, how to reach the public. And so I started to look a bit more into effective conservation messages, something around how can we create messages that meet different values of people. I was also doing a little study where we were looking at different photos being released, like the two photos you can see on the right-hand side with this photo. So this is actually Merlin Tuttle. He's a famous bat researcher, and that's a photo from the 80s, and it just shows a human being fascinated with a bat and a dead bat. And we were looking at different sets of photos and what kind of emotions do people, like what kind of emotions are getting evoked when people see these photos. And we found that when people see photos of dead bats, for example, they feel more compassionate. And when they feel more compassionate, it also has an impact on their intention to get involved in bat conservation. So we are playing at the moment with different photos to get a better understanding what actually motivates people to get involved. And so we are looking at different emotions such as joy and anger and fear and disgust. But it just seems like that compassion is a quite big driver when it comes to wildlife protection. And so this is something we are playing. We are doing some smaller research projects on at the moment. And also I was recently getting quite interested in the part of storytelling. I think, Ella, you also had a connection with storytelling, so I'm very curious to talk with you about that as well. So also looking at what kind of stories or what narratives are actually stories transferring, and what values, what emotions do they actually transport, and also looking at these stories and what they do with people, like what kind of emotions do they evoke, and do also people increase the behavior and intention to get involved in bat conservation. So this is some work. I'm currently collaborating with some linguistic researchers and psychologists and social scientists, and I'm also very curious to talk with you, Ella, about this. So yeah, that's basically it. Thank you. Yes, and if you're keen, feel free to reach out.